Good afternoon. Welcome to the Hingham Municipal Light Board meeting of April 8th, 2025. This meeting is being held remotely as an alternate means of public access pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023 and all other applicable laws, temporarily amending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You're hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. Okay, and now we are going to go right to the presentation on the sustainability plan proposed by the Spiegler Group. David Spiegler is here. Could you introduce your team? And I think you have the ability to share.
Okay, very good. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the chance to connect with everyone here. My name is David Spiegler. I'm president of the Spiegler Group. With me as well as Glenn Purcell, vice president of the Spiegler Group, who worked on the project as well. So what I'm going to do is share my presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, very good. Okay. All right. So what I'd like to do is share with you the findings of the grid modernization assessment that we just completed with the Hingham Municipal Lighting Plant team. And I would ask if there are any questions or comments or thoughts that come up as I go through the presentation. Please stop me at any time. I'm happy to field any questions. I don't want anyone to feel like they need to hold questions until the end. So with that, what I'd like to do is just share with you, there's a very lengthy presentation here of which we're not going to go through all of it, but I wanted to have access to any portion that based on the questions that come up. What we'll focus on is the executive summary, which really draws from information looking at other sections in there. And I'll just talk about what else is in this presentation after the executive summary. We looked at some different advanced metering infrastructure options, different network architectures. We looked at different grid modernization use cases in terms of how to leverage infrastructure for the benefit of modernizing the Hingham electric system, the business case behind all of that. We looked at the power supply options and kind of the structure that's in place right now. We looked at an element of system analysis in terms of thinking about how to pull all this together, and then what the implementation strategy would be going forward, and then looking at next steps and what the next portions of the project would be. So in terms of providing a perspective of all the different elements of the project here, we looked at, as I mentioned, at some different network architectures. We know that AMI is an area of interest. And so what we looked at is a couple of things. One is AMI economically viable for Hingham? And secondly, assuming that it is viable, there are different network architectures that vendors we wanted to evaluate. Are there some that are really cost advantaged versus others? We looked at three core architectures. The answer to the first question is that yes, AMI is very feasible and looks like a very viable option. And we looked at three different network architectures, namely a LoRaWAN, a mesh architecture, and a point-to-multipoint. All of them offer value. There's the LoRaWAN is a little bit lower cost, but it's more of a no-frills system. The mesh and the point-to-multipoint are a little bit more robust and have more capabilities, and they cost a little bit more. But if a decision is made to go forward and issue an RFP and bid out an AMI system, based on what we've seen, we would not recommend barring anyone from participating in that process. We would recommend including anyone in regardless of network architecture. Now, what we looked at is the goal is not just to have an advanced metering infrastructure by itself, but to actually leverage that system to support other capabilities as well. And so we looked at a host of different system use cases in terms of ways that we would leverage the metering data and other sources of data as well. Some of the things that came up through the financial operational model that we ran are first of all, upgrading the GIS, the mapping system, as well as the CIS, the customer information system, really offer potential strong values to really pull together some of the benefits of the data management and leveraging a lot of the data and to streamline some of the workflows and provide greater capabilities, both on a customer-facing as well as on a system-facing basis. We also looked at Connect Disconnect as a separate use case, although it's not something that you buy separately. It's something that you buy as part of your AMI package, but we wanted to evaluate whether it would be financially prudent to deploy Connect Disconnect either in mass or selectively across portions of the service territory. And the answer is yes, it offers some value there as well.
Can
One
I
of
ask a question about that? Is Connect Disconnect just is it physical? Is it in the meter or is it software?
Yeah, well, it's both, but there is a disconnect switch. So you would buy, if you wanted to locate a disconnect meter at a particular location, it is a different meter that has a disconnect switch built into it. And then the software in the AMI head-end would manage that so that you'd be able to remotely disconnect that meter and then remotely reconnect the meter as well.
So I'm going to assume that they're more expensive than
They
regular
are.
meters,
Yes,
such
they
that you
are.
would not want to outfit your whole territory with those.
Yeah, and that's the way we've modeled it. Now we have other projects where there's decisions that have been made to say, well, we want to be able to have it everywhere so that we know that if, let's say, a challenging situation and someone moves and we want to have the disconnect, that it would go with them, and so therefore they do it everywhere. But we don't believe that that is necessary. We think that you could isolate it in just certain locations, and that's in effect what we've modeled in what we're illustrating here today.
Thanks.
Sure. One of the areas that we think is tremendously valuable is the potential for time of use. We have looked at the power supply structure that you've got, which we think is very favorable, and you've got a lot of very positive elements there. But there is additional value to be able to leverage some of the system capabilities to be able to put in place a time of use system. Now, we, at this point, because we don't have the AMI data yet, because we don't have an AMI system in place yet, we can't suggest what that time of use structure should look like and what the specific rates are to have on-peak rate versus off-peak rate. We have modeled, because we've been involved in a lot of time of use over the years, is we've taken up a typical time of use scenario and modeled out the kind of impacts we would expect to see to test out whether it's warranted. So this is not something you'd deploy today. You'd wait until the AMI is complete. You'd run the analysis based on the interval data, and then you could design your time of use structure at that point. But what we have seen is that there is sufficient value to pursuing that. And one of the things, just going back to that prior note in terms of the upgraded customer information system, any CIS system that is purchased or upgraded to, you would want to make sure that it has that kind of time of use capabilities as well. We also looked at a DERMS system, which is a distributed energy resource management system. It is for the purpose of managing some of the DERs, the distributed energy resources, out in the field, whether they be utility owned or whether they be customer owned. We think that given the interest of third-party battery energy storage systems, as well as some of the demand response programs that may be warranted in the future, the DERMS platform could offer some value. Now, if we were going to be in a situation where Hingham Municipal Lighting Plant was going to deploy major DERs itself, then we would want to have a very robust and capable DERMS system. Effectively, what we're advocating here is a smaller, scaled-down version of that, because it doesn't warrant the investment for a full-blown, there are very elaborate systems, but to have some capabilities in terms of managing some of those third-party resources.
Does it scale up easily, or does that involve replacing it entirely?
Yeah, no, there are options. And again, this is one of these areas we have not at this point picked particular vendors. But and the reason I say that is because there are certain systems that have modules that can be activated. So you can start off with a small basic package, and then you can activate modules in the future should the need arise. One of the things we would suggest is that when the time comes to issue that request for proposals for a DERM system, that be one of the considerations about how well it scales, rather than having to buy one now and then 5 or 10 years from now buy a different one. So, but many of the systems that we're looking at do offer that capability.
And are they just sort of separate standalone things, or um, are they integrated with the software for AMI in such a way that there's an advantage to purchasing them at the same time or installing them at the same time?
So the answer is a little bit of both on that. So there are huge advantages to integrating the systems together. Now they are separate systems. A DERM system and an AMI head end are completely separate systems. In some cases, you have some of the vendors that offer sort of DERMs as a service as part of as part of their AMI head end, and that may be something that may be warranted. So when the AMI the order, and we'll talk about this in a little bit later in the presentation, but the idea is to put in place the CIS system first, then you come in with the AMI system, and the DERMS would come in after that. But when you're soliciting bids on the AMI, it would be worthwhile to inquire about what kind of DERMS interfaces they have either embedded within the system or what kind of capabilities they have as third-party integrations to allow you to understand that when you get a system, you're not locking yourself into a system that's completely siloed. Because where the DERMS offers a tremendous amount of value is when you integrate data from the AMI head end as well as the SCADA system and pull all those resources together, it gives you a much more robust reporting capability.
Thank you.
We also looked at, and this is a little bit different in terms of the centralized call center, to look at the evaluate what the financial impact would be. So when a Hingham Municipal Light Plant takes over the call center for the water operations as well, as long as the pricing structure is properly established, then it absolutely makes sense. And we've benchmarked the rate that we've modeled right now alongside sort of industry norms and practices. And the number that comes in place is the number that we're suggesting is it fits quite well with the with what we're looking at for industry norms. And it's not just for the call center; it's also looking more broadly at just customer support and customer care center, I guess is an even better way to put it. And part of that, we believe, is that we have modeled separately a customer portal and a prepayment system as well as two separate entities because we wanted to test those both out. In reality, you wouldn't get a separate customer portal and a separate prepayment system. You'd get a bundled system. And in actuality, what we are likely to do, as I mentioned, the first thing we would do is go out for a CIS. We would solicit a CIS that has the customer portal built in, that has the prepayment system built in, so that when you have the AMI, it integrates straight in with that and offers all those values. So in some respects, the business case numbers, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, may be overburdened with cost because we looked at a separate CIS, a separate portal, and a separate prepayment system. Really, it's going to be a bundle of all three.
Did any of your estimates involve apportioning part of the expenses to the water system? Or is it just the total price is what we're looking at, and we would sort that out amongst ourselves?
Yeah, so what we did is when it came to the portal and prepayment system, we looked at that solely for the electric operations, but we'd be made available for the water as well. And the idea is that the apportionment would happen with that customer care payment would come in to cover that functionality as well. So what happens is, as long as that structure is put in place, all that customer care offers that value, then at the tail end of that, or at the back end of that, the portal and the prepayment system would provide support, which would offer operational efficiencies when running those programs.
Thank you.
Sure. Now, looking at the financial package and those different pieces that we're looking at, there's the estimated cost for everything put together is $4.5 million over 5 years. Most of that is the AMI system. So about $2.8 million is directly associated with the AMI system, and the remaining $1.7 million is for everything else we're talking about. And what we've done is calculated out what the annualized rate of return is, and it comes out to 17.8%. It's a very strong and robust business case. Full system payback, we're forecasting achieving that within 7 years. We've also looked at the power supply and what you have in place right now. And our belief, based on a lot of analysis that we've run, is that you're in actually a very good position. The portfolio is being managed very well. It's being managed very actively, and we don't have any issues with it. and it's offering you a good diversification in terms of what that portfolio is. Now, one of the things that we're looking at is that may offer some value is exploring options to have bulk power purchase agreements that will cover a little bit more of the base, so that you're going to the spot market a little bit less. But we're on the margins here. For the most part, everything is looking very, very strong on that side. All right. Any other questions before I'm going to go into now some of the, I've hit with a lot of information here, but are there any other comments, questions, thoughts on any of this so far before I go into further detail?
I don't see any.
Okay. All right. Very good. So, oh, hang on.
Uh-oh.
Not good. Okay. PowerPoint just crashed on me. All right. Let me get this re-going and we'll restart it. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. Let's share it again. Okay. Can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. All right. So in meeting with the team at the very beginning of the project, we went through and held what we like to refer to as a strategic visioning session and talked through all the different opportunities in looking at modernizing the system. So we looked at it, as we mentioned, the AMI piece of it. But beyond the AMI, we then asked the question, how could we leverage this data that would come out of the system, and what else would we do with it? And we came up with 12 automation use cases that would align with the AMI. And it just so happened, as a coincidence, 6 of them were on the customer-facing side, 6 on the system-facing side. So on the customer-facing side, the things that customers would see or experience, the call center, the upgrade of the CIS, the connect disconnect capabilities, the portal, the prepay, and then looking at time of use and dynamic rates. And the part that customers typically don't see that are more system-facing are system analytics, conservation voltage reduction, the DERMS platform we talked about, distribution automation, FLIZR, which is fault location isolation and service recovery, and then a GIS upgrade. So what we have done is we have developed a very elaborate financial and operational model. And just to kind of show you, I'll just switch screens for a moment here. This is the actual model itself. Okay, so what you can see is we're looking at the next 10 years from 2026 all the way to 2035, all the benefits, the operating expenses, the earnings, the depreciation, the net income, capital, cash flow on an annual, cash flow on a cumulative basis, and then net present value of 1.1 million, internal rate of return of 17.8%, peak funding of 2 million. And what we look at here is we have these switches of these 12 different, the 6 on the customer facing, 6 on the system facing, and we have these switches built in so we can turn these pieces on and off. We have 3 different network architectures that we're looking at. And then we have all the system data that we were able to collect from the team. We have all the data related to metering functions and the customer-facing side of things, the system-facing side of things, all the system costs. And then we went in and calculated what the system is going to look like for every month over the next 10 years. We calculated the benefits, the capital, the operating expense, and then we came up and looked at to see what the viability of some of these different use cases are. And then we went from there and created all kinds of graphs and charts and tables. So let me go back to the presentation. So this is a snapshot that came, this a screenshot that came right out of that model that I just shared with you. And there's a lot of numbers here. So let me just walk through and explain what we're looking at here. We have these rank ordered from most valuable to least valuable of the different use cases that we're looking at. And what we have is, since we have the next 120 months, 10 years at 12 months per year, we have 120 months worth of benefits. What we do is we calculate how much the benefits are going to be generated for each of those 120 months, and then discount them back to today's dollars. And in the case, I'll just use the top line, the time of use is $1.07 million in cumulative benefits valued today. The operating expense, the capital expense associated with it is very small. It's $18,000. The operating expense is $10,000. And at the end of 10 years, there's still another $93,000 of value left over. So what we do is we take the $1.07 million, subtract out the 18,000, subtract 10,000, add back 93,000, and we come up with a net present value of positive $1.1 million. And so that's the number one ranking use case. And then we keep going down. You can see it gets smaller and smaller. The last three are all showing negative values. So any positive NPV would suggest that we're getting a good bang for our buck. We're getting more value out of the system than what it's costing us to put in and support it, as opposed to anything that's negative, where it's going to cost us more than we're going to get back out of it. So if you look at the time of use, what we have seen is that given you've got demand levels that are going up, and we'll talk about this when we get into the energy, the power supply issue, you've got demand levels that are increasing, but your energy delivery, and that's what's driving your cost on power supply, but your revenue that's coming from energy delivery is actually going down. So you're in a bad place there for the future, where costs are going up for power delivery and revenue associated with that power delivery is going down. So the time of use rate is a tool that can be used to normalize that and get those in better alignment. So there is a significant amount of value associated with putting that in place. Again, once we have that AMI data that comes together. The next thing is, or items 2 and 4, are the GIS and the CIS upgrades. This is where there's a lot of value to streamline a lot of the workflows. A lot of the processes are currently being done manually, just by the nature of the systems that are in place. So upgrading those, even though there's an investment associated with it, will generate a lot of value and support a lot of the functionality that we're looking for the overall modernization scheme. The connect disconnect is, again, we talked about that. So it's not modeled to have your whole system, but it's an area where we can reduce, as part of the AMI deployment, reduce some of the operating expenses associated with rolling trucks and have to do disconnects and reconnects, as well as generating bad debt. So there's an opportunity to leverage some value there. The DERMS, again, there's a lot of potential value as we start thinking about, like we were talking about with the time of use, to be able to look at demand management capabilities and maximize the yield on that, and managing some of the third-party resources. There's a lot of potential value on DERMS. The call center, again, that's a negotiated term. In the model, we've capitalized the labor. Doesn't have to be capitalized, but that's the way we've structured in the model. As long as the pricing structure is in place, there's a lot of potential value there. The portal and the prepay, again, we have those as two separate entities, but in real life, we would put them out as one bundled application. There's also a lot of potential value in analytics, leveraging some of that AMI data, and that is also something that potentially could come as part of the AMI deployment, depending on which vendor on AMI we want up choosing. Some of them have stronger analytics capabilities than others. And that's not to say you couldn't mix and match, say, take the AMI from vendor A and take the analytics from vendor B, but if you can get them in one place, then all the better. The three on the bottom.
Could you just expand just a little bit on the analytics, please?
Yeah.
Beyond the other advantages that you've got on the page here, what else could improved analytics deliver for the light plant to make our operations make more sense or save money?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So where analytics can come in and be very helpful is in right-sizing transformers. So there's a huge issue that we have today where availability of transformers is limited and the cost of those transformers is becoming exorbitant. So it is really helpful for the light plant to be able to maximize the yield on the transformers that are already in place. And so the idea of right-sizing transformers, analytics will give you a real-time tool that allows you to identify which transformers are overloaded and which ones are underloaded. So if you have an overloaded transformer today, the idea is, well, we have to go out and buy another transformer. There may be a situation, wait a second, we have one over here that's oversized for what it's needed. This one is undersized. Let's swap them. We can solve our own problem without having to buy an overpriced transformer that takes 6 to 12 months to be able to even source. So that's one application that could offer some benefits. Another one is when it comes to power quality. So power quality issues can come up whenever there's any kind of disturbance on the line. It can cause damage at a customer premise. By monitoring the analytics through the system, it will give you a very real-time capability to view those kinds of issues and resolve issues before they become problems, causing damage either to the customer premise and their electronics, or to the Hingham Light Plant own infrastructure. So those are a couple of examples. Again, different vendors offer different kinds of capabilities, but those are a couple of examples that we would expect to see from analytics.
Thanks. It's
Sure.
very helpful.
All right, good, thank you. The last three on the list are showing negative values: FLISR, conservation voltage reduction, and distribution automation, and those are really in two different buckets. So I'll talk about the bottom two in a moment. So conservation voltage reduction and distribution automation, we do not believe they make sense for Hingham Municipal Light Plant. The goal of CVR, conservation voltage reduction, is to be able to reduce your wholesale demand charge, which is a great thing. And the way you do that is during a peak period. So let's say from 4 to 6 today, if it's going to be a hot day and we think that there's likely to have a system peak, we would drop the voltage at the substation bus bar, reduce the voltage for, let's say, from 4 to 6 p.m. And at 6, we would elevate it back up again and reduce our system peak. And it's a very good way to be able to do those kinds of things. The problem is, and there's value there. I mean, if you look, there's $200,000 of potential value. The problem is there's $240,000 of capital expense that's needed. And the reason for that is that, number one, your overall system efficiency is very good. Your the voltage profile is very flat. The feeders are very short. So throwing that kind of solution out at a problem that we probably can solve much more economically with things like time of use of DERMS is probably a very expensive way to solve a problem that we can solve somewhere else. The same thing happens on distribution automation. The idea of creating looking at ways to kind of have pull top switches and having tie lines and integrating some of these circuits together. It's a very nice idea. There's value there, but it's very expensive to do that. And again, the same comment I made about CVR, because of the fact that you've got short feeders, it's a compact service territory. Economically, it's just not the best use of dollars, of scarce dollars. Now, the one area that could be a maybe is FLISR. Now, what you'll see is the benefit is tiny. It's $3,000 of benefit over the next 10 years. So why are we even talking about that? There was one problematic feeder that, and when we modeled out FLISR, initially we modeled it citywide, and it really did not make any sense. But in talking with the team, we identified there was one problematic feeder that even if we're not going to deploy a FLISR system across the board, perhaps we set up some reconductoring and some tie lines at that location and manage that, because just to improve the system reliability in that portion. From a financial perspective, this doesn't make sense. And really, we're not talking FLISR anymore. We're just talking about one isolated part of the system. But from a reliability, if you're a customer that happens to be on that feeder and you have a lot of outages, it might just be worth the investment to just do that. So what we've done in the business model, I showed you a moment ago when I pulled the model up, we had these 12 different use cases. We had the switches for on and off. We actually have the FLISR turned on, even though it's economically not great. We just think it's probably worth the investment, whereas the bottom two are not.
Could you just explain what the FLISR system does? Imagine that we are a utility that wants it for our whole system. What would it do for us exactly?
Yeah, so let's take on a much larger system. Let's say National Grid, right? National Grid has FLISR, and what that does is FLISR stands for Fault Location Isolation Service Recovery. So it diagnoses problems and then it handles remote switching on an automated basis. So if during a storm event a pole goes down and takes out a portion of the service territory, what would happen is that the FLISR system would identify where the problems are and then would close in on the fault, would backfeed a portion of that service territory. So there might be, you'd be able to get service back to customers faster for a good chunk of the customers while you continue to work on the pole. So while folks are, the crew is out there working on the pole that just went down during the storm and repairing that, Some customers, maybe not all of them, but some customers we can backfeed automatically. We don't have to do any remote switching on a manual basis. It'll do that remote switching on an automated basis, get those customers up within 60 seconds for an outage event that might last 2 or 3 hours. So that's the benefit of it. The problem is it's for National Grid, because they've got a very large service territory and a lot of sprawl to their territory. It makes a lot of sense there. Here, it's just very compact. It's not cost effective to do it everywhere, except perhaps in that one problematic feeder.
So what you're showing here for costs, is that relate to just the one feeder
Just
that
the
you
one.
think
Yeah.
it might be worthwhile to make an investment for reliability purposes?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. We had a much larger number for the capital expense when we did it system wide, and the benefit was larger too, but the capital expense was exorbitant. So we've reanalyzed that and looked at it on an isolated basis.
And before you go on, could you just explain prepaid metering? What
Yes.
is that program?
So prepay can be a really positive benefit, where today all of the customers of the light plant are post-pay. So they use electricity, and then the meter reader gathers that information in terms of what their consumption was at the end of the month. We send them a bill, and they pay that bill after the fact. Prepay allows customers, either all customers or some customers, to pay in advance. And what that does is it allows customers to have control over on a real-time basis. So all of that AMI data, as it's reporting, because you're getting those intervals every 15 minutes. So you're getting 15-minute consumption data coming into the system, and it's updating the system. So it allows customers to see on a real-time basis where they're at, and they can make payments as they go. Rather than having to pay just at the end of the month, they can make payments as they go along, just like a prepaid cell phone, for example. Now, the reason this can be very valuable is the folks who really seem to like this application are folks that sometimes struggle with their finances. And when they get at the end of the month, they have a $150 light bill. That's a major life event. It's very challenging for them to pay that, and then they face disconnection. What happens here was the prepay is that they have the bank of money that's there, and they get alerts on their smartphone that tells them, you have, based on your consumption patterns, you have 17 days of electricity left. You've got 12 days. And the same thing is, we would apply this for the water customers. You've got 13 days of water usage left. So they'd be able to monitor that, and they would get an alert saying, hey, you've only got 3 days left. If you've got someone who is financially challenged and is worried about having to make a monthly bill, they may not have the money to be able to pay an entire month's bill, but they can go and say, right on my smartphone, I can put $10 on my bill and buy myself a few extra days. And then when I get my paycheck on Friday, then I can pay $50 and I'll really get ahead. So it allows for a greater flexibility for a segment of the customer base that sometimes struggle. I'll share with you a story on prepay, and I shared this with the team as well. We've implemented prepay with a number of our customers, and one of them is a fellow by the name of Marty Ivy in Mayfield, Kentucky. And I always quote him when it comes to prepay. He has said that prepay has turned his worst customers into his best customers. The folks who are always getting disconnected and then reconnecting and being subjected to late penalties, and then they were complaining about the bill, how I couldn't have used this much electricity. All of a sudden that goes away, because those are the customers that have become the most aware and the most active, because they have it right on their smartphone, and they're able to see all the things that are happening, and they know, oh, right, the energy spiked on the 12th of the month because that's the day we had company over and we threw a big party and had the whatever going on. So they already know why so they never call in with high bill complaints, and they don't have issues with disconnection anymore, because they're able to manage those programs. But in effect, that's how a prepaid system would work.
So the benefits that you're showing here effectively are savings from lowering the number of disconnects that happen in customer interactions with customers who have trouble paying their bills. Is that where the
Yeah.
benefits are coming from?
Yeah, the benefits are coming from a couple places. Number one, we're looking at And every time the truck roll that has to go out to disconnect the meter, and then they come back, and then when the customer pays, you go back out, reconnect it, and then come back in. And for many of these accounts, you're doing that back and forth, several times over the course of a year. So that's number one, is the elimination of truck rolls. Number two is the fact that we're reducing bad debt as well. So folks who run up a bill and then no longer have the resources to be able to pay it, and then move to another, just leave the bill and never pay it again. We've eliminated a good short portion of that. And there's also the time value of money by getting that money in. The lighting plan has access to those funds earlier on.
Mhm. Thank you.
Sure. So what this leads us to is we've taken those same values in terms of that net present value, in looking at how we would bundle this and what might make sense. So it's really, we're looking at four different elements of a procurement phase, of going out and putting out a bid document and putting out an RFP and doing this. The first one would be a CIS. And so what you'll see is the ones that are color-coded green align with that. So with one purchase, the idea is that we would have four different capabilities built in. Well, 3.5 really. The CIS upgrade, which is on the fourth line, and then below that, the customer portal and the prepay would all be aligned that. Now, we also have the time of use dynamic rates colored green, but as I mentioned, that's going to come in later in terms of being able to activate that module once you have the AMI system in place. But you would be able to leverage that. You'd make sure you got a CIS system that was robust enough to handle time of use and dynamic rates. Once that was in place, then the next activity would be to pursue the AMI. And with the AMI, you would get the connect disconnect and the system analytics as well. And then likely the third one, which would come later on, would be the upgrade of the GIS system for the mapping. And then the fourth would be the DERMS, is the fourth piece. Now, the two other areas that we've not highlighted, the centralized call center, you don't have to go out and procure that. That's you have that within your capabilities today, and we know that that's moving forward. And then the Flizzer, again, that's not something you're going to get. Again, we called it Flizzer, but really, since we've scaled it down, it's really just doing some reconductoring and setting up some tie lines for that run problematic feeder. That doesn't require a big procurement effort, so we haven't color coded that. So as a result, that's kind of the phasing of how this would be built out.
Before you go on, could I ask you similarly to lay out what are the benefits that we would expect from the GIS upgrade?
Yeah, so the GIS upgrade is an area where there's a lot of manual process right now. It's taking internal staff a lot of time to do things that that automatically would be enabled on a much more dynamic basis. So there's some labor savings to create more productivity. The other piece too is that you're getting, I'll refer to as kind of an asset optimization play as well. A lot of people talk about asset management, and what we're talking about is asset optimization. What you want to do as you get that GIS upgrade and you load in that new meter data into it, every meter would be geolocated once it gets deployed, and all of your field assets would be updated within the GIS as well, which now gives you greater capabilities in understanding what you actually have out there and true conditions. This, coupled with the system analytics, would provide you system information about which portions of my service territory and my infrastructure are problematic, that are likely to need to be repaired or replaced, and other areas where perhaps they're under stressed and we can get more life out of them rather than having to replace it. So that GIS upgrade is not just for the software itself, but really being more transformational in terms of getting extension of life on the assets. We have estimated that we believe, based on all the infrastructure you've got in place and seeing what you have now and what the potential might be, we would be able to extend asset life by 4% on average across the entire distribution. So a lot of the value comes from that as well.
And I see that that is the second most valuable upgrade that you might suggest. So that's interesting.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I showed you this. So this is the screenshot of what I showed you in the model. So again, what you have here in the top section are the benefits that come from each of these different areas, the AMI, the customer-facing applications, and the system-facing applications. What's interesting about this is that if you look at the numbers, and I realize there's a lot of numbers here, but the AMI values are around $90,000 a year, give or take, in terms of annual benefits, whereas the customer-facing is around $500,000 and more. The system facing grows to almost $400,000. The AMI is the least valuable, but it's the most expensive part of it. It's the support infrastructure. If all you were doing was just putting out meters because you wanted, as I like to call it, the cash register on the side of the house, it's a better cash register, but if that's all you're getting out of it, it's not going to be cost effective. What really offers value is enabling all these other items that we're talking about. So that's where the AMI is kind of a loss leader and provides capabilities with these other elements. The operating expense you can see growing from around $100,000 a year to about $300,000. The earnings are positive throughout, starting at around $588,000, growing up to $866. Depreciation charge, as we can see there, net income is also positive all the way throughout, fairly steady. Then the capital investment, we are forecasting a 3-year build schedule. So there's big investment in years 1, 2, and 3, and then it drops down significantly with not nearly as much in the outer years. And then we have the cash flow on an annual basis and the cumulative. And you can see at the bottom the net present value of $1.1 million positive, the internal rate of return of 17.8%, and then the peak funding of $2 million. The peak funding is a number we like to look at. It's although your capital investment is larger than $2 million, it is a way to consider that once you start generating benefits off the system, effectively the benefits serve as a self-financing tool as part of the plan. So we look at how deep into your pockets, net of all the benefits that you're getting, do you have to get before your kind of the business case pays for itself. And in this case, it's about $2 million.
For the project as a whole, not just
Yes.
in year one,
Yeah, correct. Well, for the project as a whole. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But of course, you still have to come up with that $4.8 million to get started.
Absolutely. Now, the idea is that some benefits are continuing to come in. So you're paying out of one pocket, you're getting benefits in the other. But yes, in terms of budgeting, you have to plan for the $4.5 million. So here is that some of the same information graphically. So the light blue bar shows the annual benefits, and you can see that where the shape of that. The dark blue shows the operating expense, and then the yellow is the earnings, which is positive every year in the forecast period, and then the gray bar shows the net income, again positive all the way through. This is where the source of the benefits are, and this is kind of illustrating what I was mentioning before. The orange section it shows the AMI benefits, so it's a very small portion of the overall benefit flow, where the biggest portion is the customer facing, and again, a lot of that is that time of use rates that offers significant relief against your power purchase requirements right now. And then some of the system-facing applications like the system analytics and things like that in the yellow section. But overall, it's a little north of $1 million once we get to steady state. And then the capital schedule, the $4.5 million is over that 3-year period. So it's a little over $2 million. The green is the AMI, the blue is the customer facing, and the orange is the system facing. So you can see a little over $2 million in year one, about $1.2 million, about 1.2 million and a quarter in year 3, and then it drops down significantly after that. Just project maintenance and growth and things like that. And then we see the cash flow, and we look, the blue bars show the cash flow for that particular year, and the green show it on a cumulative basis. So in year 1, there's negative about $1.5 million in cash flow. Year 2 is negative, so the green bar gets a little bit worse. Year 3, it's still a little bit negative, so that green bar keeps getting worse. And that's kind of your peak funding right there, is where's that green bar bottom out at. And then starting year 4, now that we're out of the active deployment, we're just sort of dealing with growth and maintenance issues. Cash flow on an annual basis turns positive, so the cumulative basis gets a little bit better. We recoup some in 2030. By almost 2031, we're almost broken even, but by 2032, year 7 of the project, we've now completely gotten all of the funds back, and we're now in the black on that.
And would you project a 20-year lifespan for the AMI meters, which are the largest investment?
Yeah, it's usually between 15 and 20 years is what we'd expect to see.
Mhm.
Okay, now we want to get into the section dealing with the power supply. Glenn, do you want to walk through this section? Glenn, are you there? All right, he's not there, so I'll just take it. So what we have seen is we've gotten a lot of very detailed information in terms of what the energy consumption patterns has been, and one of the things we've heard is that we're dealing with this issue of declining energy sales, and clearly over the recent years we have certainly seen that, but it has not always been the case. So what you see is really three distinct periods of activity. The orange bars from 2004 to 2009 on the left side of the graph show some significant growth as a lot of increased traffic and system demands. Then the green, it continued to grow and sort of stabilized. And then this recent period, ever since 2017, we've seen the trend going backwards with a lot of reductions in overall system requirements.
I think Glenn can speak now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I didn't make him a co-host, so he couldn't unmute himself, I guess.
Yeah, and I think in this case, David said it perfectly. It's really three distinct different phases of your utility. One where you started seeing growth, where the growth peaked, and now you're seeing a steady decline within consumption. And based off of 2016 to where 2023, it's a 9% decline in annual consumption in itself. Next slide. Here's where, one of the things we kind of want to look at is, what is your usage, and are you growing or do you have decline usage? Now, one of the other key things is your peak load, because this will determine the capacity, in generation that you must keep, and, some of your largest costs. And what we're seeing is, based off the past, you're returning to near some of your peak demand. And, with most of it looking as July 54.1 and September 51.8. Next slide. So one of the other things that, I looked at was your seasonal demand. And if you look at the orange trend line, that's the peak demand compared to your annual consumption. I didn't have all of the data for 2024, so I estimated that. But what you're seeing is consistent what we see with many of the utilities, especially in the Northeast, with just seasonal variation. Next slide. I think this is the one that really is the interesting one, and the next one. So what we kind of looked at was the annual variation, but between your most expensive contracts. And, that account for 80% of the annual 19.8 million power cost supply, and where that's broken up. And obviously what you're seeing is similar to the demand, as you grow, the load goes up during the June through August, and then starts moving down, and where your cost factors are. In the next slide, what you're seeing, and this is the one I think kind of tells you how well it's being managed, your power supply itself, is based off of your 10 top contracts. The average is roughly 14 kilowatt hour, 14 cents kilowatt hour, and majority of your 7 out of the 10 are below that, which tells you how efficiency based on the efficient capacity cost versus, how you're using it. And I think this kind of tells really how well it's being managed based off of the total volume of ISO trades that are happening. And they're doing a great job for you, be honest with you. Next slide. And then finally we looked at your total mix. I couldn't tell all the type of ISO trading activity, but my assumption is that this is actually higher than the 70% clean energy source overall, because most of the trades, from what I could tell, seem to be renewable and clean energy sources. So you're well, on a regulatory standpoint, you're well on your way to that 80% mark, if you're not close to it or at it right now. Next slide.
All right, so getting back into the issue of the, pulling all of these pieces together, the question is, and we've kind of laid out what the different phases and different procurement efforts that would go in. Overall, in the aggregate, the things that you'd want to have is, number one, you'd want to have an AMI system that has that disconnect under glass, so to speak. It's contained within the AMI meter. Analytics in a perfect world would be part of the AMI acquisition or as a standalone. Again, there are certain vendors. One of the things we looked at, and I mentioned this before, we looked at 3 different network architectures. There's what's called a mesh, there's a point-to-multipoint, and a LoRaWAN. Those are the 3 major architectures that we see. And while the LoRaWAN's a little bit cheaper than the other 2, it's a little bit more of a no frills and it doesn't have as much capabilities. At the end of the day, we would recommend going out and bidding it out and taking all comers. There's about 8 to 10 different AMI vendors that are well known in the industry that we would consider. And we wouldn't recommend excluding anybody per se. But some of them offer better and more robust analytics packages than other ones do. So a decision will be made, and that's not something we have to decide right now, is do we want to go with if let's say it's tied between 2 systems that the lighting plant team really likes 2 systems, but one has a better analytics package than the other, that could be the tiebreaker between the 2. Or alternatively, if we see that the team really likes one AMI vendor, but doesn't like their analytics and likes from someone else, then we could look at that as well. So that's just something as an option. Again, the GIS, we're going to look at upgrading that as well. The CIS, which would be the first thing really to do, is to look at that upgrade, and with that, to make sure that it has the prepay, the customer portal, time of use. Again, same comment as with analytics. It is possible to do prepay and customer portal as a standalone. In a perfect world, we would just get it bundled and just deal with one vendor. The DERM system, we've talked about that, the idea to integrate some of these resources. And we think that, as we've talked about, one of the things we were discussing before is the potential to have sort of a scalable system where we could start with something that's fairly small and basic, because we don't need a very robust DERM system today, but I can envision where that's going to happen in the future. And then what we need to do is make sure that with all these different systems, some of which are from the same vendors, but some of which are from different vendors, we have to have a data management platform that integrates all of this data together. We don't want to have a metering system that's completely isolated and siloed that doesn't leverage some of these other capabilities. We want to have that data management to afford us the ability to accommodate some of the time of use rates. Now, those bullet points all speak to what we need to go out and buy. There's also some things that need to be done once we get that updated CIS, for example, that we don't just do things the way we're doing them today with an outdated system and a more limited system. We want to be able to tap into some of those additional enhanced capabilities and system processes and look at the billing process, look at the customer service functions that really leverage those kinds of capabilities. Glenn, I'll toot his horn a little bit. He's worked in the industry for over 30 years as a CIO within utility organizations and heads up our work in terms of process reengineering and a lot of workflow development and data integration. And that's really where a lot of the value comes in. It's great to have a robust business case with a strong internal rate of return and positive NPV, but the way you get that is by making sure that all the things that happen behind the scenes operate the way that they should. We'd like to have the outage management system to be able to integrate in with the CIS so that in a perfect world, what we'd like to do is get to the point with these AMI meters that when there is an outage on the system, that it provides those kind of capabilities to identify and diagnose what's happening and then report to customers, hey, we know your power is out and this is what our expected restoration time frame is, rather than waiting for them to notify us and then we respond. And then the GIS, again, where we're going to get the benefit there is by spreading that across the entire organization. We don't want that to just be a siloed application, which is just a data repository of GIS coordinates, so that from time to time, someone goes in and gets a shapefile for some particular use. What we want to do is integrate it across the entire organization. And in a perfect world, what we really want to set up is that when a customer service representative is talking with a customer and let's say it makes a change, say they move or they're whatever the situation is, and that record gets updated, that flows through to the back end of the system where system operators. So today, the challenge is where, if the customer service rep makes a change at the meter head end or in the CIS, and then separately some other change is being made on the GIS side, those changes don't flow across, and you keep doing that over time, you wind up with disconnected database of system, and it's not integrated with each other. And so the goal is to pull all together, and the GIS provides across the entire organization. So in terms of where we would go from here, the goal is we've just gone through an assessment. We've identified what does make sense, what doesn't make sense. The next thing is to go through requirements and be able to detail out the technical needs that would need to be put in place. So what our suggestion is, don't just go out tomorrow and say, okay, we want to start talking to AMI vendors or we want to start talking to CIS providers. What you really want to do is have an understanding internally what are the requirements? What do we want to put in place? How is this going to integrate together? What are we leveraging off our existing systems? Because the goal is not to just rip and replace everything. Let's keep the good stuff that we have right now and build around it. So let's document what that looks like. And then we take a portion of that and forklift it out of our internal requirements document and put it into a public-facing request for proposals so that we can get quality responses from the vendors. So when we do that, then we go into the procurement phase where we write the RFPs, we manage the entire RFP process, have the bidders conferences and the Q&A periods and the down selection to the short list, and you check references and do site visits and all that kind of good stuff. And then once you've selected the vendor for each of these initiatives, then you partner up with that vendor through the plan development phase and start working with them in terms of what is that system design, what's that architecture look like, what modifications based on the requirements we laid out do we need to make, and then you go into full deployment and you start moving forward. So what we would suggest in terms of a sort of a start with the ground level and build our way up, phase one would be that CIS billing finance capability. That's going to be foundational. So what we want to do is start looking at that in the coming months and really later this year and in spilling into the early part of 2026. Then it would position us to put in place the AMI, the GIS capabilities, the portal, and those kinds of elements in phase two. The third phase would be to integrate the outage management system, provide the analytics which would come with the AMI, and also start using that AMI data to build a time of use plan. And then phase four, the last piece, would be the DERMS, the advanced grid capabilities that would come at the back end. Okay. So what that might look like is something like this in terms of a Gantt chart. So the first thing we would be looking at is the requirements phase. And what we want to do, as you'll see from the tagline, is there's a lot of work that we're recommending that is done, but it all doesn't have to be done tomorrow. We don't want, we recognize that folks that, they're working at the light plant have day jobs, and we need to respect that and make sure that they don't wind up in this project fatigue where they're just inundated with a whole bunch of things all happening at the same time, and they never have a chance to digest any of this stuff. So what we're suggesting is this kind of phased approach, and what we've laid out here is just the beginning of it. It's not everything forever. But in the requirements phase, let's say if a decision was made to start moving forward now in April, You'd mobilize on the project on developing the requirements. You'd come up with your system level architecture between April and May. Then what you would do is you'd set up your KPIs, your key performance indicators, so that, again, we built the business model to identify what kind of things we think we can accomplish. The last thing you want to do is build out a whole bunch of systems and not keep that in mind. And then you're wondering whether you're actually capturing the value that you expected to have. And so the KPIs are a great way to track that and make sure that everyone's in the organization is on board with that, and we're watching that and watching our metrics. Then you adapt your use cases. You start thinking about, how do we want to leverage? We know we want a CIS, but what kind of functionality do we need to have, and what would that look like? So you think about all the different use cases. Again, we have a head start because we've gone through this project, so we have an idea about what we're aiming at. But nevertheless, we refine that. Then you go into technical requirements. These are the technical specifications in terms of security requirements, system integration, data mapping, and the interties between these systems. And you really specify all those different elements, versions of existing software that have to be integrated with, and all that's documented. Then you look at the operational impacts in terms of what will this mean within the organization? How are people's jobs going to change? How are we going to change certain things? What are the things that we're doing today that perhaps are not as efficient as they ought to be? And then you look at your deployment scope and start thinking about, all right, how are we phasing out? So for example, when it comes time for AMI, are we going to do it all in one shot? Are we doing it over 3 years, 2 years? Are we going to do the first 10% and then pause while we work through our processes and then go from there? So all of that gets worked out at that point. That gets us to the August timeframe, there was a logic in terms of why we wanted to set that up, because we know that there's a lot of current, in terms of the IT demands that are placed on the IT department today. There's a number of things that are sort of in the way, and we want to be thoughtful about putting that documentation together in a meaningful way between now and when their time frees up, maybe around September, October timeframe. So we don't want them to get bogged down in working with, interfacing with vendors. So the first thing we would then do in the next group of blocks is the CIS, billing, finance, procurement. So that's where we would, in let's say August, we'd start working through the procurement strategy for that piece alone. Between August and September, the RFP would be developed and then would be released in September. The responses would come back in October, which is around the time that the IT department has, we're expecting that we're going to have a little bit more time to start interfacing with vendors. We go through the selection process between October, November, and into December, when we would decide which event system we want to go with and would contract. So by the end of this calendar year, we'd be in a position to have that nailed down. The activity, once we've got to that point, we're estimating 15 months to actually implement the system. The first 4 of those 15 months are focused on all the plan development. So before the vendor comes on site and starts doing system integration, starts implementing systems, we would then say, okay, let's work through the process flows. What's our implementation plan? Let's develop the configuration specifications with the vendor, develop the change-out plan, set up the quality assurance plan, make sure there's test scripts available. And if there aren't, then we develop them, set up the integration plan with all the different systems, the communications, and then you come up with your test plan development. That gets you through April. And I see Thomas just raised his hand, so let me stop here.
It's just one of our board members has a hard stop in 5 minutes, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to check in with Tyler.
Yeah.
And plan ahead. So let me ask David, your plan was to go through the rest of this rollout?
I only have one more slide. I only have one more slide, so this is timing out pretty well, actually.
Well, except we have other things on the agenda, so we need to think about that.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, okay. All right.
So what the other items on the agenda were to talk about the board meeting recordings, heat pump debrief, approve meeting minutes, look at financials. I'm feeling like what we need to do maybe is see about scheduling an extra meeting just to catch up with where we want to be, maybe in 2 weeks. I don't know if we could do that because we're behind on meeting minutes, etc. We're behind on looking at the financials. So maybe let me see. Does it make sense once David has finished his presentation if Tom and I should have a conversation about what to propose to the board for next steps on this and bring that up at that meeting. Does that make sense, Tyler and Mike? Tyler's sticking his thumb up, Mike's sticking his thumb up. Okay. So then let us plan, let's, Tyler and Mike, could you make a meeting in 2 weeks? That would be April. What would that be? Can't open the calendar.
22nd.
22nd at 4 p.m.
When is town meeting? Is that those dates?
Oh, yes, right. It's a town meeting. That's, we're almost sure to be town meeting. Perhaps the week after, April 29th.
Yeah, I forget what date town meeting is. but-
Town meeting's the 28th and 29th.
Okay, all right, yep,
So Tyler and Mike, oh, the 20th and 29th, so the 22nd is okay.
yep.
Okay, Tyler and Mike, is that doable? Are you able to speak? Yeah, can't speak.
Well, I think I have to make them co-host.
Make them co-hosts.
I just thought Tyler have a thumbs up.
Yeah,
Yeah, but he might
think-
have something to say as well.
I think that would work. That's the day after Easter, school vacation week.
Yeah. Mike?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. So we'll plan to continue with the rest of this agenda at that time, and hopefully Tom and I will have had a chance to talk about where to go forward. So David, do you want to finish your last slide?
Absolutely, yes, would love to. All right, so let me reshare this. Okay, so anyway, so this is basically looking at what this would look like in terms of a phased approach going from the plan development with the CIS and then going into the deployment, which would take us into early 27. So by March of 27, we would complete with that. And then what we would do is while the CIS was being implemented, then we would begin the process of evaluating AMI. So we would begin that process of working on the AMI RFP in May of 26, with the idea of releasing the RFP in June of 26, having our vendor picked out around August, September, and then going through that same kind of process about the next 4 months of the plan development, working alongside the vendor that we've selected there, and then going into deployment from there. So that takes me to my last slide. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there's more stuff that would come, but again, we would do the same thing and continue to stagger that. So if the decision is made that, yes, we would like to start moving forward on this, what you want to do is develop an internal team that's going to work on this. We call it a task force, but obviously we'd love to have the chance to work with you in the next phase, but whether we do or don't, you want to make sure that you don't just hand it off to us and we're happy to do that, but you have to take ownership of it and the team has to be part of that process. So it's important to be part of that and having that dedicated focus. The recommendation is develop that requirements as the baseline for system design. So rather than just, we see too often where a utility goes to a conference and I'm at a conference right now and you know, there's vendors out there and whatnot, and you fall in love with a vendor and then you say, well, that one seems good and my neighboring system has it, so let's just go with that. What you want to do is take that step to develop the technical requirements and make sure that everything that you're getting is what you want to get and it's perfectly situated for you. Otherwise, we've seen those horror stories where folks get a system and then regret it later and it doesn't meet their needs.
Okay, David, I think we're at Tyler's hard stop
Yep.
now. So
Okay.
is that right, Tyler? You need to go, right? Is he still a co-host?
Thought I did.
Okay, I think you could probably unmute now. Yeah.
I can stay on for a few more minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's finish it up, and then I'll just
right.
say that when David is done, we'll be revisiting this at our next meeting and talking about what the implications of this might be, and we will postpone the other items from this agenda to that meeting. And when David is done, I'll be asking for a vote to adjourn. So go ahead, David.
All right, 30 seconds. So then once you finish the requirements, then you go into the RFP, go through that bid process I talked about. Through that RFP, you engage with the vendors, you choose who you want to work with. And then, and the last bullet point is the one I really want to emphasize. All the change management efforts to make sure that everything works the way it's supposed to should not happen after the fact. You want that as part of the overall process, so that you make sure that everything works the way it should at the end of the day. And that's it.
Okay, great. So I have just one question, which is, does the choice of who we go with for our new customer information system have an impact on the AMI meter choice? Do those two systems talk to each other?
They will
They
talk to each
must.
other, yeah, and we would make sure that any vendor on either side, that you're not getting such a proprietary system that you're locked in. You should not have any issues on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Coup-
Mike
couple
and
of-
Tyler, any questions?
Couple of comments. I thought that the past history data of where we are on our loading and our peaks was great, but I didn't see any information or forecasting of where we're going in the future as we electrify. Second question, I think we're looking at a system that's going to be good for 15 to 20 years. I would really like to see something that's dynamic, something that modules can be activated later on once they're developed and grows with us as we grow with the industry. I really feel uncomfortable locking into something that's fixed.
Okay, great.
I would agree with that. That's absolutely what you want to do. And again, that's my comment about not having a proprietary system that locks you in. You want that kind of flexibility, because the world will look different 15 years from now than it does today.
Right.
Okay.
And looking through your slides, I didn't see Honeywell listed as an AMI vendor. Are they still in the game?
They're not one of the major players. They've been bypassed by some others, but they are still in the market.
Okay.
Tyler, questions or comments?
No, not right now. Thanks.
Okay, more later. We will be revisiting this soon. Thank you very much, David, for the really excellent presentation. That's really got me thinking. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Glenn, too.
So
Yeah.
moved.
Yeah. Second.
Okay, all in favor. Mike?
Aye.
Tyler?
Aye.
Laura? Aye. Thank you very much, everyone.